What happens when Hollywood royalty meets British television's sharpest tongue? In just 21 seconds, a single cutting remark about royal protocol would transform Meghan Markle from composed duchess to flustered celebrity, sparking the most explosive walk-off in daytime TV history. The atmosphere in the Loose Women's studio that Tuesday afternoon was electric with anticipation. Meghan Markle sat poised in the guest chair, her perfectly styled waves catching the studio lights as she prepared for what should have been a routine promotional interview. Across from her, Janet Street Porter adjusted her signature glasses with the precision of a seasoned predator sizing up her prey. "Right then, Meghan," Janet began, her voice carrying that familiar no-nonsense tone that had made her a household name. "Lovely to have you here on Loose Women. Now, before we dive into your latest projects, I think our viewers would love to know about your transition from actress to duchess and back to, well, whatever it is you're calling yourself these days." The other panelists exchanged glances. Ruth Langsford offered a diplomatic smile from her position, while Colleen Nolan shifted slightly in her seat. Kay Adams maintained her professional composure, though her eyebrows raised almost imperceptibly at Janet's opening salvo. Meghan's smile remained perfectly intact, though those watching closely might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. "Well, Janet, I think that's a rather reductive way to frame someone's life journey, don't you? I've always been committed to using whatever platform I have to make meaningful change in the world." "Oh, meaningful change," Janet repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Right, yes. And would that meaningful change include the way you've handled your relationship with the British press? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you wanted all the perks of being royal without any of the responsibilities that come with it." The studio fell silent, except for the low hum of cameras. Ruth cleared her throat delicately, attempting to steer the conversation back to safer waters. "Perhaps we could talk about your upcoming projects, Meghan. I understand you have some exciting ventures in the works." But Meghan's composure was already beginning to crack. Her voice took on a sharper edge as she responded directly to Janet, ignoring Ruth's diplomatic intervention. "I find it fascinating, Janet, that you would make such sweeping judgments about someone's character and motivations without actually knowing them personally. Isn't that exactly the kind of tabloid mentality that drives the very problems we're discussing?" Janet leaned back in her chair, clearly relishing the confrontation. "Oh, I see. So now I'm tabloid press, am I? Interesting, considering I'm sitting here giving you a platform to promote whatever it is you're selling this week. But please, do go on about how terribly you've been treated." Colleen attempted to jump in with a lighter tone. "I think what Janet's trying to say is that our viewers are curious about the challenges of transitioning between such different worlds. It must have been quite an adjustment." "Don't speak for me, Colleen," Janet interjected firmly. "I'm perfectly capable of saying what I mean. What I'm trying to say is that some of us have been working in British television for decades, dealing with criticism and controversy without running off to complain to American talk show hosts about how unfairly we've been treated." Meghan's carefully maintained facade finally began to slip. "Running off? Is that really how you choose to characterize someone making the difficult decision to prioritize their mental health and family safety?" "Mental health," Janet scoffed. "Right, yes. That's the excuse du jour for everything these days, isn't it? Can't handle a bit of criticism from the press? Mental health. Don't like your job? Mental health. Want to quit your responsibilities but keep all the benefits? Mental health." Kay Adams looked visibly uncomfortable, her professional instincts warring with her desire to maintain some semblance of civility. "Janet, I think we should be careful about dismissing genuine mental health concerns. It's a serious topic that affects millions of people." "Oh, spare me, Kay," Janet shot back. "I'm not dismissing mental health. I'm questioning whether every celebrity who faces a bit of pushback gets to claim mental health as a shield against legitimate criticism. There's a difference." Meghan's voice rose slightly, her American accent becoming more pronounced as her emotions heightened. "Legitimate criticism? You call the relentless harassment, the racist undertones, the invasion of privacy legitimate criticism? The constant scrutiny of every outfit, every gesture, every word, racist undertones?" Janet pounced on the phrase like a cat with a mouse. "There we go. I wondered how long it would take before you played that card. Here's a newsflash for you, love. Being criticized for your behavior isn't racism. Being held accountable for your choices isn't racism. And frankly, throwing around accusations like that diminishes the experiences of people who face real racism." The tension in the studio was palpable. Ruth made another attempt at mediation, her voice carefully measured. "I think there are valid points on both sides here. The media landscape can be challenging for anyone in the public eye. but there are also legitimate questions about public accountability for public figures. Thank you, Ruth, Meghan said, though her gratitude seemed strained. At least someone here understands the complexity of the situation. Don't patronize Ruth, Janet fired back immediately. She's being diplomatic because that's her job, but I'm not interested in diplomacy when someone sits in that chair and expects us to nod along while they rewrite history to make themselves look like a victim. Rewrite history? Meghan's voice was becoming noticeably sharper. I'm sharing my lived experience, my truth. Your truth? Janet repeated mockingly. Right, because apparently we all get to have our own versions of reality now. Here's some truth for you. You married into the most scrutinized family in the world, and then acted surprised when you were scrutinized. You wanted the fairy tale without the fairy tale responsibilities. Colleen tried once more to lighten the mood. I think we can all agree that being in the public eye comes with challenges none of us can fully understand, unless we've experienced it ourselves. Can we, though? Janet wasn't backing down. Because I've been in the public eye for 40 years, Colleen. I've been criticized, mocked, attacked, and dismissed more times than I can count. But I didn't throw a tantrum and move to another country. I got on with my job. Your job, Meghan said, her voice now ice cold, doesn't involve representing an entire nation or being subjected to the kind of coordinated harassment campaign that was launched against me and my family. Oh, please, Janet rolled her eyes dramatically. Coordinated harassment campaign. You sound like a conspiracy theorist. The press criticized you because you gave them plenty to criticize. Your behavior at royal events, your expensive clothes during a cost of living crisis, your seeming inability to follow basic protocol. Protocol, Meghan spat. There's that word again. As if following arbitrary rules created by people who died centuries ago is more important than being authentic and true to yourself. Authentic, Janet laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what you call it? Because from where I sit, it looked more like someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them. Someone who wanted to modernize an ancient institution without understanding what that institution actually represents to millions of people. Kay made one final attempt to restore order. Perhaps we should move on to discussing Meghan's current projects. I believe you have some exciting announcements to share? But Meghan was no longer interested in promotional opportunities. Her media training was failing her as genuine anger took over. You know what, Janet? I came here thinking I might have an intelligent conversation about important issues. Instead, I'm being subjected to the same small-minded, bitter criticism that drove me away from this country in the first place. Small-minded? Janet's voice rose dangerously. Bitter? Let me tell you something, sweetheart. I've earned my place at this table through decades of hard work and professional achievement. I don't need lessons in small-mindedness from someone whose greatest accomplishment was marrying well. The other panelists sat in stunned silence as the confrontation escalated beyond anything they had experienced on the show. Ruth's diplomatic smile had vanished entirely, while Colleen and Kay exchanged worried glances. Marrying well? Meghan's voice cracked slightly. Is that really what you think? That everything I've achieved, every cause I've supported, every project I've developed is just because I married Harry? Well, let's be honest. Janet pressed on relentlessly. How many of those projects were you offered before the engagement? How many of those platforms were available to you when you were just another struggling actress in Toronto? I was not struggling, Meghan shot back. I was a working actress with a successful career. Working actress, Janet smirked. Right, on a cable show that most people in Britain had never heard of. But please, tell us more about your meteoric rise to relevance that had absolutely nothing to do with your royal connections. Meghan's hands were visibly trembling now as she gripped the arms of her chair. You know what, Janet? This is exactly the kind of toxic behavior that makes British media so incredibly damaging. You're not interested in having a real conversation. You just want to tear people down to make yourself feel important. Toxic behavior? Janet's voice reached a new level of incredulity. I'm asking you direct questions about your public statements and actions. If that feels toxic to you, perhaps you're not ready for public life at all. Ruth made one desperate attempt to salvage the interview. Ladies, I think we're getting a bit heated here. Perhaps we could take a moment to reset and approach this from a different angle? No, Ruth, Janet said firmly, her eyes never leaving Meghan. I think our guest needs to hear some home truths. You can't spend years making public statements, giving interviews, and writing books about how badly you were treated, and then expect to sit here without being challenged on any of it. Challenged? Meghan's voice was rising to match Janet's intensity. This isn't challenging. This is bullying. This is exactly the kind of behavior that creates the hostile environment I was talking about. Bullying? Janet repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. Right, so now asking tough questions is bullying. How very convenient. Tell me, Meghan, in your world, what constitutes legitimate journalism? Only questions you approve of? Only coverage that makes you look good? Colleen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. I think maybe we should all just take a breath here. Don't tell me to take a breath, Colleen, Meghan snapped, her composure completely shattered now. I'm tired of being told how I should react to being attacked. I'm tired of being told I should just smile and accept it when people like her, she pointed directly at Janet, use their platforms to spread negativity and hatred. Negativity and hatred? Janet leaned forward aggressively. I'm holding you accountable for your own words and actions. If that feels like hatred to you, maybe the problem isn't with me. Maybe the problem is that you've been surrounded by yes people for so long that you can't handle anyone who doesn't worship at the altar of your victimhood. My victimhood? Meghan's voice cracked completely. You have absolutely no idea what it's like to have your every move scrutinized, your every word twisted, your family threatened. Your family threatened? Janet pounced immediately. By who? When? Or is this another one of those vague accusations that you can never quite back up with actual evidence? Kay looked desperately toward the production booth, clearly hoping for some kind of intervention, but the cameras kept rolling as the confrontation spiraled further out of control. Evidence? Meghan was nearly shouting now. What kind of evidence would satisfy you, Janet? Screenshots of death threats? Photos of photographers camping outside my mother's house? Would that be enough? Or would you just claim those were fake too? Death threats, Janet said dismissively. Right, because every public figure doesn't get those. Welcome to fame, sweetheart. If you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen. Don't expect the rest of us to pretend your experience is somehow more special or more traumatic than everyone else's. More special? Meghan's voice was shaking with rage. I never said it was more special. I said it was unacceptable. There's a difference between legitimate criticism and coordinated harassment campaigns designed to destroy someone's reputation and mental health. There you go again with the conspiracy theories. Janet rolled her eyes. Coordinated harassment campaigns. Who exactly was coordinating this campaign? The editors? The photographers? The readers? Or is everyone who doesn't love you automatically part of some grand conspiracy? Ruth made one final, desperate attempt to restore some semblance of professionalism. Perhaps we could discuss some of the positive aspects of Meghan's advocacy work? Advocacy work, Janet scoffed before Meghan could respond. You mean the photo opportunities with carefully selected causes that make you look good? The speeches about empowerment while you're being chauffeured around in luxury cars? The lectures about inequality from someone who spends more on a single outfit than most people earn in a year? That is so unfair, Meghan protested, her voice breaking slightly. You're reducing years of genuine advocacy to photo opportunities. Do you have any idea how much work goes into the projects I support? How many hours I spend researching, meeting with experts, developing real solutions? Real solutions? Janet's voice dripped with sarcasm. Like what exactly? Can you name one concrete, measurable change that has resulted from your advocacy work? One specific problem you've actually solved rather than just talked about? Colleen looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair as the confrontation reached new heights of intensity. The atmosphere in the studio was electric with tension, every crew member watching in fascination as the interview imploded in real time. You're impossible, Meghan said, her voice barely controlled. You're determined to see everything I do in the worst possible light. Nothing I could say would satisfy you because you've already decided I'm guilty of some imaginary crime. Imaginary crime? Janet leaned back with a satisfied smile. The only crime I'm accusing you of is hypocrisy. You want to be treated like royalty when it suits you and like a private citizen when it doesn't. You want the platform that comes with fame, but none of the accountability that goes with it. Accountability? Meghan's composure finally snapped completely. What about your accountability, Janet? What about the accountability of journalists who spread lies and distortions? What about the accountability of editors who approve racist headlines and invasive coverage? Racist headlines, Janet repeated mockingly. There we go again, still waiting for someone to show me one of these allegedly racist headlines that wasn't actually just criticism of your behavior that you've chosen to interpret through a racial lens. Chosen to interpret? Meghan was on her feet now, her professional facade completely abandoned. You think racism is something I'm choosing to see? You think the comparisons between me and Kate weren't deliberately designed to play on racial stereotypes? Comparisons between you and Kate. Janet stood up as well, matching Meghan's energy. You mean comparisons between someone who understood her role and someone who thought she could rewrite the rules? Someone who respected tradition and someone who thought she was above it? Kay made a weak gesture toward her earpiece, clearly receiving instructions from the production team. But the confrontation had moved far beyond anyone's ability to control it. Above tradition? Meghan's voice was shaking with fury. Or maybe someone who thought tradition could evolve? Someone who thought an institution claiming to represent modern Britain might actually try to be modern? Modern Britain, Janet shot back immediately, doesn't need lectures from someone who lived here for less than 2 years before deciding we weren't good enough for her. Modern Britain is perfectly capable of evolving without input from Hollywood celebrities who think marrying a prince makes them qualified to reshape our institutions. Hollywood celebrities? Meghan was practically vibrating with rage. Is that all you see when you look at me? Just another actress who got lucky? Not someone with her own achievements, her own perspectives, her own right to have opinions? Your own achievements! Janet's smile was razor sharp. Right, let's talk about those. Northwestern University. Very impressive. Brief acting career, moderately successful. Lifestyle blog that most people had never heard of. Tell me, which of those achievements qualified you to lecture the British public about our institutions and traditions? Ruth was frantically gesturing to the production booth now, but the cameras continued rolling as the confrontation reached its explosive climax. You know what, Janet? Meghan's voice was ice cold now, her fury transformed into something far more dangerous. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. I don't have to subject myself to your bitter, small-minded attacks. I came here in good faith to have a conversation, and instead, you've turned this into a character assassination. Character assassination? Janet's eyebrows shot up. I've asked you direct questions about your public statements and actions. If that feels like character assassination, perhaps you should examine the character those statements and actions reveal. That's it, Meghan said, reaching for her microphone pack. I'm done. This is exactly why people leave this country. This is exactly the kind of toxic, destructive behavior that makes British media so incredibly damaging. Oh, you're leaving. Janet's voice was triumphant. How very typical. When the questions get too difficult, just walk away. Just like you did with the royal family. Just like you do with every situation that requires you to actually account for your choices. Meghan's fingers fumbled with her microphone pack as Janet's words hit their target. Typical? You think this is typical? You think wanting to preserve some dignity in the face of relentless attacks is typical? Dignity? Janet's voice rose to match the mounting tension. Where was your dignity when you were giving tell-all interviews to American television? Where was your dignity when you were writing books about how terribly your in-laws treated you? Those weren't attacks. Meghan spun around to face Janet directly, her microphone dangling from one hand. Those were my attempts to tell my side of the story after years of lies and distortions. Your side of the story. Janet stepped closer, her voice cutting through the studio air like a blade. Right, because obviously your perspective is the only one that matters. Everyone else involved in those situations, they're all liars, are they? Everyone except you got it wrong? Colleen made one last desperate attempt to intervene. Ladies, please, let's just calm down for a moment. No, Colleen. Meghan's voice was shaking with barely controlled emotion. I will not calm down. I will not sit here and be lectured by someone who clearly decided years ago that I was guilty of something and has been looking for evidence to support that conclusion ever since. Evidence? Janet's laugh was harsh and bitter. The evidence is your own behavior, your own words, your own choices. I don't need to look for anything. You've provided all the evidence anyone could need. Ruth was frantically signaling to the production team, but the confrontation had taken on a life of its own, spiraling beyond anyone's ability to control or contain it. My own choices, Meghan repeated, her voice thick with emotion. Like choosing to marry someone I loved? Like choosing to start a family? Like choosing to leave when the situation became unbearable? Those choices? Like choosing to air your family's private business on international television? Janet fired back without hesitation. Like choosing to make accusations you couldn't prove. Like choosing to burn bridges and then complaining when you had to deal with the consequences. Consequences? Meghan's voice cracked completely. You call coordinated harassment campaigns consequences? You call death threats and invasive photography consequences? You call having your every word twisted and distorted consequences? I call accountability consequences. Janet's voice was relentless. I call being questioned about your public statements consequences. I call facing criticism for your choices consequences. That's what happens when you choose to be a public figure. Kay was openly uncomfortable now, looking desperately between the two women, as if hoping someone would intervene to stop the carnage unfolding before the cameras. Accountability. Meghan's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly through the studio. You want to talk about accountability? What about the accountability of journalists who publish stories without verification? What about the accountability of editors who allow racist dog whistles in their headlines? Dog whistles? Janet's voice was sharp with derision. More conspiracy theories, more excuses, more attempts to deflect from your own behavior by claiming everyone else is motivated by racism. It's not a claim. Meghan's voice suddenly found new strength. It's a documented pattern. It's verifiable through simple comparison. The way I was covered versus the way Kate was covered for identical actions. The language used, the assumptions made. Identical actions? Janet pounced on the phrase immediately. Show me one identical action. Show me one situation where you and Kate did exactly the same thing and were treated differently. One concrete example, not vague accusations. The pregnancies? Meghan shot back without hesitation. The way we were covered during our pregnancies. The touching of the bump that was maternal and sweet for Kate, but attention-seeking and inappropriate for me. The touching of the bump. Janet's voice was loaded with sarcasm. Right, because obviously the only possible explanation for different coverage is racism. It couldn't possibly be that people responded differently to your overall behavior and public persona. Colleen looked like she was about to be sick, clearly regretting every decision that had led her to be sitting on this panel during this particular interview. My public persona? Meghan's voice was rising again. You mean my attempts to use my platform for good? My advocacy work? My efforts to modernize outdated traditions? Your attempts to make everything about you. Janet corrected harshly. Your need to be the center of attention. Your inability to follow basic protocols or respect established procedures. Protocols and procedures. Meghan's voice was bitter now. Always back to the rules. Always back to the way things have always been done. Never mind whether those rules make sense or serve any purpose beyond maintaining the status quo. The status quo, Janet's eyes flashed dangerously, that has worked for over 1,000 years. The status quo that represents stability and continuity for millions of people. But I suppose you think you know better than centuries of tradition. I think tradition should serve people, not the other way around. Meghan's voice was steady now, her anger crystallizing into something colder and more focused. I think institutions should evolve to reflect the values of the people they claim to represent. The values of the people, Janet repeated slowly. Right, and you appointed yourself spokesperson for those values, did you? You decided you were qualified to determine what the British people want from their institutions? Ruth was now openly gesturing toward the cameras, clearly hoping someone would cut the feed. But the confrontation continued to unfold with devastating intensity. I never appointed myself anything. Meghan's voice was ice cold. I simply tried to be authentic to who I am, instead of pretending to be someone else to make other people comfortable. Authentic. Janet's laugh was harsh. Is that what you call it? Because from where I sit, it looked more like someone who couldn't be bothered to learn the basics of the role they'd signed up for. Signed up for? Meghan's voice cracked with emotion. You make it sound like a job application. I fell in love. I got married. I tried to make the best of a situation that was far more complicated and hostile than I ever imagined. Complicated and hostile. Janet's voice was relentless. Or maybe just not the fairy tale you expected. Maybe just real life with real responsibilities and real consequences for your actions. Real consequences, Meghan repeated, her voice barely controlled. Like having my character assassinated on national television by someone who's never met me but thinks she knows everything about my motivations and intentions? I know what I've seen, Janet shot back immediately. I know what you've said in public. I know the choices you've made and the way you've behaved. That's more than enough to form an opinion. Kay made one final attempt to restore some semblance of order. Perhaps we should wrap this up and move on to our next segment. No, Meghan said firmly, turning to face all the panelists. I want everyone watching to understand what just happened here. I came on this show to have a conversation about important issues, and instead I was subjected to a coordinated attack designed to humiliate and silence me. Coordinated attack? Janet's voice rose to new heights. There you go again with the conspiracy theories. I asked you questions about your own public statements. If that feels like an attack, maybe the problem isn't with the questions. The problem, Meghan's voice was shaking with fury, is with a media culture that thinks destroying people is entertainment, that thinks tearing someone down is more interesting than building them up. Building you up? Janet's eyes blazed. Why exactly should we build you up? What have you done to earn that kind of treatment? What have you contributed to deserve praise rather than scrutiny? What have I contributed? Meghan's voice broke completely. Years of advocacy work, charitable efforts, attempts to use my platform responsibly. But none of that matters to you because you've already decided I'm the villain in your narrative. Your platform? Janet's voice was triumphant now, sensing complete victory. The platform you got by marrying well. The platform you've used primarily to complain about how unfairly you've been treated. That platform? That's it, Meghan said, her voice deadly quiet. I'm leaving. This conversation is over. This entire situation is exactly why people choose to distance themselves from this toxic environment. There you go, Janet called after her as Meghan moved toward the edge of the set. Running away again, just like always. When things get difficult, when people ask tough questions, when the fairy tale doesn't match reality, just run away. Meghan paused at the edge of the set, her hand on the studio door. You know what, Janet? You're right about one thing. I am running away. I'm running away from people like you who think cruelty is strength and who mistake bitterness for wisdom. Cruelty? Janet's voice followed her. I call it honesty. I call it holding people accountable for their choices. I call it refusing to pretend that your feelings are more important than the truth. Your version of the truth? Meghan said without turning around. Your bitter, twisted version of events that leaves no room for compassion or understanding or basic human decency. Human decency. Janet's final words rang through the studio as Meghan pushed through the door. Rich, coming from someone who spent years trashing her in-laws in public and then expects to be treated with kid gloves by everyone else. The studio door closed with a definitive click, leaving the remaining panelists sitting in stunned silence. Ruth, Colleen, and Kay exchanged shocked glances as the cameras continued rolling, capturing their bewildered faces in the aftermath of the most explosive interview in the show's history. Janet settled back into her chair with a satisfied smile, straightening her glasses as if nothing unusual had happened. Well then, she said calmly to the remaining cameras, I think that tells you everything you need to know about handling criticism with grace and dignity. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the low hum of studio equipment and the distant sound of voices from the production booth. The interview that was supposed to promote Meghan's latest projects had instead become a masterclass in how quickly things could spiral out of control when two strong personalities refused to back down. Ruth finally found her voice, though it was shaky and uncertain. Well, that was certainly more dramatic than we anticipated. Dramatic? Janet agreed with a slight shrug, but entirely predictable. Some people simply can't handle being challenged on their own words and actions. As the cameras finally stopped rolling, the true magnitude of what had just unfolded began to sink in. The interview that was meant to be a routine promotional appearance had instead become a devastating exposé of character, leaving everyone involved to wonder how a simple conversation had exploded into such spectacular confrontation.